Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Julie Leach. Julie is the founder of Julie Leach Associates, a firm that works with individuals and businesses to design and deliver bespoke, people-based HR solutions that help them develop and grow. What's unique about Julie is how she's used her experience in corporate HR roles within big institutions to develop a service that provides small and medium-sized businesses with a structured recruitment, selection, induction, and people development process. And be sure to listen to the end, where Julie shares with us some tips on creating a clear and transparent reward strategy to help develop employees and drive business growth. So whether you're interested in knowing more about a career in human resources, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Julie Leach, to the Inside Kingston podcast. Julie, I'm really excited about this conversation because as a partner in a small business myself, I know only too well the importance of recruiting the right people and creating the environment for them to thrive. So it's great to get a chance to hear from somebody with your experience in this field. And I think our listeners can learn a lot from your expertise in this area. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time if that's okay. So, Julie, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Chislehurst, which is in Kent. It's the London Borough of Bromley, so it's not too dissimilar to Kingston. It's just a bit further round in the M25. And I grew up there with my mum and my dad and my sister.
The Garden of England, isn't it?
Beautiful. And Chislehurst itself is lovely. It's got a bit of a village feel to it, even though it's very suburban like Kingston is. There's beautiful commons, there's lots of woodland, there's 2 ponds, there's a high street that we could walk to from where we lived. So it was a lovely place to grow up. I loved it, absolutely loved it.
That sounds lovely. And did you go to university? And if so, what did you study?
I did. So I went to the local girls' comprehensive school in Chislehurst and then decided that university was an option. My parents hadn't been to university. It was a learning curve for all of us. The teacher said she's capable, she ought to have a look at going. So we did. And I did geography, business studies and English as A-levels. And I went through phases of thinking I would do all of those, not at the same time, obviously, but those as degrees. And then I finally settled on business studies because I wanted something that was going to be really what I thought was practical and useful and be able to do as a career long term. So back then in the day, and I won't say how long ago it was, but polytechnics and the universities. And the universities only did things like management science and organisational behaviour. It was the polytechnics that did business studies. So I opted for what it was at the time was less. And then that became De Montfort University after my first year there.
Oh, fantastic. And could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you set up your business?
Yes, so I did my degree and I was delighted that I got a 2-1 and I'd specialised in human resources in the final year. And I think you could specialise in accountancy, marketing or HR. And HR was the one I was absolutely naturally drawn towards. So I did that, loved it, absolutely knew that's what I wanted to do as a career, which I think I was quite fortunate to feel because I think it's very difficult for some people. Sometimes you come out of university, you just don't know where you want to go. So I had an idea, I had a pathway that I wanted to follow. So I moved back home to Chislehurst to live with mum and dad again. and just started looking for jobs using people management, which is the publication that the CIPD, the professional body for HR people, has. And there was a publishing company in Woolwich which was looking for a maternity cover for an HR assistant. And I applied, and will be forever thankful that I got the job. So it was driving distance, or a bus ride away from living with mum and dad. So that was really convenient. And it was an amazing entry point into HR. It was, in fact, I think it was called personnel back then in those days. It was just an entry into how HR or personnel worked in an organisation. And that was amazing. So I did that for 2 years. I'd met Stephen, who is now my husband, at university. We did the same course. He'd chosen the accountancy route. He was then, having graduated, gone up to one of the big accountancy firms in London on their graduate programme and was doing that, and said to me, you really ought to come up into the city. At our age, it's what you really ought to be doing. So I left the publishing company and got a job with the Royal Bank of Scotland. And they wanted me to help with some recruitment, because back then the bank was growing. And I was working in what was called the large corporate side, so not the retail side of the bank, but the corporate and institutional side of the bank. And I absolutely loved it. I started off doing recruitment, but as I got more experience and I had various different managers, I progressed to becoming an HR consultant, and was part of the team, for those that remember, when RBS bought NatWest, which back then was, all over the headlines, because RBS was seen as this very small bank taking over one of the retail high street giants. So worked through the integration of that, and actually spent about 11 years there. And 2 of those years included working in their Hong Kong office.
Oh, wow.
And I had decided that we wanted to do something different. We weren't ready to start a family. We wanted to travel. So we asked our firms if we could transfer. So he went out with his firm, I went out with RBS, and had an amazing, just over 2 years, travelling around Asia with work, travelling around Asia on holiday, making amazing friends, having just the most fabulous time.
Wow, Julie, that sounds amazing.
It was fabulous. I love it. I loved every minute of it. And it's when I count back how long ago it was when we were out there, it almost becomes surreal, because you can't actually believe that you did it, but we did, and it was amazing. So then after a couple of years out there, we came back to England. We were very fortunate to very easily and quickly have our children. So I'd taken redundancy from RBS by then, because they had decided to buy ABN AMRO. And we won't dwell on that, because that wasn't a great success, and that led to lots of disruption in the financial services market. Mm-hmm. So I took a career break. I had about 3 or 4 years out looking after the children when they were small. So we have James, who is now 12, and Sophie, who is now 10. And then as I've said, I've always loved work, and I wanted to go back to work. And through a connection, a network of people I was told about an opportunity to work for Santander. So again, amazing place to work, had a fabulous time. I was so fortunate to find it was actually a learning and development job, but it was a part-time job. And I just couldn't believe how lucky I was to find a job with a very reputable organisation where I could use my skills, add some value, but they only wanted it on a part-time basis. So I did that for just over 3 years, and then decided to pursue running my own business, which is what I do now.
And what was it that prompted you to start your business?
Primarily, it was the children. And I remember turning over a calendar on New Year's Day, new calendar for the new year, and marking out all the childcare I would need for all those school summer holidays. And I had such a physical reaction. I remember my stomach just sort of contracted and turned over, and I almost felt a bit sick. And by this time, I suppose the children were 7 and 9. Mm-hmm. I thought I just, as much as I love my job and I love where I work, and my boss was amazing and the people I worked with were great and I was adding value and it was brilliant, I just couldn't do it anymore. And then I suddenly felt very trapped, and I thought, how on earth am I ever going to do this? Because I've got an income, I work part-time, I've got flexibility. How will I ever find another way of doing that? And I remember distinctly driving home in the dark and thought, I have to run my own business. I have to do this for myself. I have to be self-employed and see if I can make this work. And that was the starting point. And I then spent a few months trying to work out how I would make that happen, where my contact points would be, what networking I would need to do. And that's what I decided to do. Simply because I have the flexibility to be with the children during the school holidays. I couldn't bring myself to give them to my mother and father-in-law anymore, call upon favours from friends, put them in sports clubs or school clubs that they didn't really want to be at, but they were going because I needed them to. And it was all very emotional, but I got there in the end.
Excellent. So let's bring this conversation to the present. Tell us a little bit about your business today.
So I run what's called Julie Leach Associates, and I offer HR and training support to SMEs. And that's mostly organisations where the owners, the MDs or the CEOs want that expertise, see the value in having that knowledge in the business, but don't necessarily need a full-time HR or training person in the business. So I'm then called upon when they need anything HR or training related. And that can be from hiring people, unfortunately firing people, helping them with performance management, helping them with training issues, helping them with their employee proposition, employee engagement, and quite a lot of time around performance, setting objectives and helping them to increase their employees' performance.
So that's really interesting, Julie, and there's quite a bit in that I want to unpack with you throughout this conversation. Let me just start, if I may, with the flip side of that coin. What are some of the common mistakes you see your clients making with their HR procedures?
I think what often happens, and what I've seen happening, is that these businesses start quite small and then grow quite rapidly in the positive cases. And when you're a small business, HR doesn't seem terribly important. You'll find someone who'll come and work for you, and that's working, and that's all great. And then you might find somebody else to come and work for you, and that's great. And suddenly you may have gone from 2 people to 10 to 20. But what hasn't happened is the formalisation or the foundation of what is essentially the documentation, which I call sort of the operating framework from an HR point of view. So you won't necessarily have the right contracts or the policies or the procedures in place. Now, when everything is going as it should and everybody's behaving themselves and business is going really well, that doesn't even come onto the radar because it's not needed. It's the moment when something starts to go wrong, where there may be a change in somebody's attitude, an employee's attitude or an employee's performance, or the business might not be going quite as well as it was, where you suddenly need to make some changes or want to do something differently. And then there's no framework, there's no policies, there's no contract. And that's when you realise things are going wrong. And without that foundation, it's difficult to have those, well, you can have those conversations, but the lack of framework makes those conversations more difficult and more awkward.
That's really interesting. So let me pick your brains on that, if I may, and ask you for a few tips on these different facets of a firm's HR strategy. So talk to us a little bit about recruitment. How do you work with businesses so that they can find and hire the right people?
First thing you need to do is really understand what the client wants. So this comes down to, and a theme that runs through everything I do with my clients is communication. So it's asking those really pertinent questions and then listening properly to what I'm told. So what sometimes happens is that somebody thinks they need an employee to do a certain job, and yes, I could run off and find somebody to do that for them and then bring that person into the organisation. But sometimes by talking it through in a bit more detail, you realise that actually it's somebody to do something else, or you have got the capacity in the organisation to do that. They just didn't realise they had. So the first thing is to really work out exactly what is needed. Is it what the manager thinks it is? And then once you've worked out what that looks like, you then choose the most appropriate channel to go and hire somebody through. And that might be using LinkedIn, it might be using their network, it might be using some of the online resources that are available to everybody now. And then I will do as much or as little in that process as they want me to. So I can write adverts, I will write interview guides, I will conduct interviews if needed, or I will coach the managers through doing that themselves. It depends how much time they've got to spend on it. And I will just, as I said, do as much or as little as they feel they need me to do.
So once that right person has been hired, how important is it to have a formal induction process? And what are some of the tips you can give us on that front?
I think inducting new employees is one of the most important parts of employing somebody, because you've got that initial day, week, few months to really explain and engage somebody into your organisation. And looking back, I was thinking about this before I started talking to you. There was an organisation I worked with once, and their induction program consisted of sitting the new employee down at a desk and saying, the next 3 days will be your online induction. So please sit here and follow this online program for 3 days, and then come and find me when you finished it.
Oh gosh, that doesn't sound very exciting.
Just my personal view, and somebody will have spent an awful lot of time and money and resources building that program. Yes, there is a place for online learning and resources, absolutely, because, we don't have libraries anymore and you can just find information very quickly on intranets and internets. But I believe the engagement with an individual is so important. So it's simple things like showing them how where the kitchen is, where they go to get food. Do people bring their lunch in, or does everybody go out for lunch? Making sure that when they arrive that their technology works, because if they can't sit at a terminal to do something useful, then what are they going to be doing? Introduce them to people around the office, and really simple things that I think as an employee who's been there a while, you almost take for granted, but you forget how important it is, because it's all about the connection you make with people. It's about feeling included. It's about feeling involved. It's about feeling wanted, that they want you to be there. So everything that with communication, I think, is really important.
I really like that, Julie, and I really like the common sense approach that you've taken on that front there. Little things that perhaps everybody in a company would take for granted are completely new, and sometimes it's a little bit scary for that new person just joining the team. So just being able to sort of appease that feeling of being a little bit scared, and that sort of novelty of where things are and how people sort of act, or where the company culture is in terms of lunches, or where, that, I think that just creates a massive goodwill, or a feeling of goodwill amongst the employees and that new person that's just joined the team. So that's really cool. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely. And the point you make there was what I was going to say next as well. It's about the culture, and culture is often defined as how we do things around here. So helping somebody understand as quickly as they can how we do stuff around here.
Yeah.
What's our culture? Are we flexible in our start times and our finish times? Is lunchtime flexible? Or, just how it works, that people can see that more quickly and can settle in more quickly.
From your perspective, Julie, could you tell us a little bit about the importance of a performance management process, and how perhaps reward strategies can help drive more productivity from a team?
I think having a performance management strategy is really, really important. I think that employees need to understand what their role is, what they're expected to do, and how they're expected to do it. And again, this is a conversation I have frequently with clients, that if somebody has complete clarity over what it is they're supposed to do, which may start with a job description, so they actually know what it is they've been hired to do, employed to do. And then there are regular conversations with their line manager about how they're doing and their performance, and what specifically they're expected to do that month or that quarter, or in whatever performance period the organisation has. It just it just makes managing people, in my view, much easier, because you have that conversation around, well, we said you were going to work on this project, and you have done. That's brilliant. That's great. So there's the day-to-day work that an employee would be or could be required to do in their job anyway. And on top of that, you can then layer on some project work, the added value work, which will stretch them and develop them and add value to the organisation. And having those regular conversations around what it is they're required to do and how they're doing, and what support they might need if they are struggling slightly. And struggling slightly is absolutely fine. We all learn. That's how we learn, by maybe doing things and not getting it right first time. So having that support around employees in that way is also really important. So I do spend quite a lot of time with clients looking at performance management and helping managers set objectives and have those conversations around performance. And then reward is really interesting and is incredibly emotive. I haven't come across anybody that thinks they're paid enough. Everybody thinks they ought to be paid more for what they do because they add huge amounts of value to the organisation. And it's can be quite a tricky one to talk to employers about. So I would always start by looking at some market data and doing a survey of what that role in that market, in that industry pays. And that will always give you then a very objective starting point. So again, if an employee comes and says they're not paid enough or wants to be paid more, then you can have a conversation, but you have some data as a starting point to have a sensible conversation. And there are some industries where bonuses or incentives will enhance people's motivation. I think you have to be quite careful around that, because if you look at lots of data and research, money isn't the biggest motivating factor at work. I think it's quite important to get some of the other things right as well, which is around engagement, communication, people feeling they're adding value. And then you can sort out clearly the money needs to be right, but that isn't going to be the biggest factor in motivating your team to do the best they can for you.
Which, interestingly, is what you said at the top of the show, right? Having that framework when you're still a small business, just before you're hitting that scaling up stage, really creates the pathway for you to successfully grow that business and be able to have those conversations because you've set the scene up front. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Julie, part of your business is also in training. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I love training people. I love helping people get better at what they do. And the majority of the time, if somebody has come on one of my training courses, yes, they may have been told by their manager it's something they ought to do, but often there's a desire for somebody to get better at what they do, which I love, because that makes it really rewarding to work with people. So a lot of the content I deliver is around management and leadership development. And I particularly love working with clients where they've got a management population who genuinely want to get better at managing people. And then what I can do is weave in lots around HR skills. So having difficult conversations, how to set objectives, how to help manage people's performance. And the times when you know you've got it right and you go back and you get feedback from that delegate that it really worked, or they've been able to do something they couldn't do before is so rewarding. And I absolutely love that feeling. And some of the other training courses I do are around presentation skills, how to deliver presentations effectively, how to communicate effectively, how to manage your time well, how to work well in a team. And I do training around personality types as well, that is one of my favourite. I absolutely love that. And you can see people's eyes kind of widen when they kind of get why they work or they get on really well with one colleague but less so with another, and what that means and how you can help enhance that relationship and get a better working relationship. So I love it. And I love talking, as you can probably tell. So the fact I get a few hours, I love it. Absolutely love it. And I get great feedback as well. And I get a lot of repeat business, which makes me feel really good as well.
Oh, thank you, Julie. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Julie, what are some of the key business lessons you've learned throughout your life?
Some of the key business lessons I've learned are, one, absolutely around communication. Because whoever you are, whatever you're doing, I think you need to communicate well with the people around you. Because if you don't, from an employment point of view, people will start making things up. If there's an absence of communication, people often just make stuff up because in the absence of having anything concrete. So I try and communicate really well with my clients all the time, and I advise my clients all of the time, make sure you're communicating. Is there a weekly email you could send out to your team? If there's going to be some change in the business, just tell them this is what is happening, and try and be as honest as you can be, because I think if you communicate well and you are honest, you build credibility, and then if you build credibility, people will trust you. And I think they are some of the most important lessons I've learned. And just be truthful to you and everybody around you. Just be who you are. Don't try and be something that you're not.
I think those are huge lessons. Thanks, Julie.
I'm most proud of the fact I was given some great opportunities at RBS. I worked with a great manager who helped build my confidence, and then that enabled me to go and work with more difficult and challenging parts of the business. And from that grew my confidence in asking if I could then go and work in Hong Kong. Working in Hong Kong was without doubt an amazing experience as well. And what I achieved working at Santander, I ran a big cultural change project there for about 18 months. And I was very proud of what I achieved there.
I think it's really interesting as well, Julie, that a lot of the interviewees so far who have taken a journey similar to yours, and in fact, I took a journey similar to yours as well. I started in the city, big corporates, and then moved to an independent firm. It just gives you a different level of confidence for when you are in a smaller firm or indeed running your own firm, because of the opportunities at scale that you got to do at the big corporates. I find that quite fascinating, how sometimes what can be seen as a bit of a corporate type job with corporate politics and everything actually really gives people the right tools to then succeed in running their own businesses in the future.
I completely agree with you. And of course, back then I didn't know it, but working for the organisations I did I don't think I could be doing what I do now if I hadn't done that, because I was learning. And as I said, I didn't know it at the time, but I was learning from the best. RBS grew to become one of the biggest financial institutions in the world. And I was best practice every single day. I was seeing cutting edge ways of managing things and doing things, and I just wouldn't have got that if I stayed in a much smaller organisation. So I think about this quite a lot, actually, and whatever my children go on to do, I would hopefully encourage and coach them to start out somewhere, or at some point in their career have the opportunity to work in a big organisation, or a market leading organisation, or a cutting edge, whatever it is they want to do, because you will just learn so much. And as I said, I didn't know I was learning it then. It's only when you come away from that, and I'm now doing what I do now, that I still look back and lean on the experiences I had, the knowledge I had, thinking back to the leaders in those organisations and how they behaved and how they got results from people. I draw on all of that now to hopefully make me an effective HR consultant or training consultant for the clients I work with.
Absolutely. Julie, what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Oh, goodness me. Well, there were lots of projects in the pipeline, and I don't know whether we need to tell our audience that we're recording this while we're all in the middle of lockdown.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be challenging, and I think the next 6 to 12 months will be challenging for me, because the training side of the business is quiet because people obviously social distancing. So my challenge there is to work with my clients to deliver online training for them if that's what they need. Again, some of my businesses are quite small, and that's not going to be their focus right now. Business survival is their focus, which I completely understand. And then from the HR side, it will be monitoring how things are going, and then hopefully working with my clients as they come out the other side of this. But again, that might be, unfortunately, downsizing some of them if that's what they need to do to ensure their survival. So it's a bit uncertain at the moment. And yeah, we'll just have to see how it goes. And of course, along the way, as most of us do who are self-employed, there's that constant client generation, looking for new clients, looking for new opportunities to work with people. So that's a big thread as well at the moment.
As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Julie, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
I have three key things that I do. I bake. I love baking. If anybody follows me on Instagram, they will see that while we've been in lockdown, my baking has increased. I'm getting
Excellent.
through butter and flour quicker than anything. I love to dance. And so I do Zumba classes frequently. And again, I've got an amazing Zumba instructor who is delivering classes online. So I'm doing that 2 or 3 times a week at the moment. And football. Both my children play football. My daughter plays football to academy level standard. So whilst we're not there at the moment, I spend a lot of time at the training ground with her and at her matches, watching her play football. So that's how my time.
That's really interesting. Julie, are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
When I was on holiday last summer, I read The Clockmaker's Daughter by Kate Morton. And because I was on holiday, I read it in about 7 days or something. I then ordered another book of hers called The House at Riverton, which I'm playing my way through, but in normal life I just don't get as much time to read. But I've ordered another one of hers, The Secret Keeper. So Kate Morton is my favourite author at the moment.
Fantastic. And are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, we're very behind the times here, but somebody recommended to my husband the US version of The Office. So whilst the UK, Ricky Gervais only did, I think, a couple of seasons for the UK, they've done about 9 seasons in the US, and we're just watching that every evening. And I really like it. I acknowledge we're about 10 or 12 years behind everybody else, but it's worth watching. I find, given the times we're in at the moment, I just wanted something to watch that was amusing, wasn't too heavy, wasn't depressing in any way, but something that would just make you smile and make you laugh. And that does it for me every night.
Yeah, and I second that. The US version of The Office is a great show. And just so that you don't feel that you're the only person that watches or binges on old sitcoms, my wife and I are currently going through Seinfeld. So that just shows you. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
I have my website, which is julieleachassociates.co.uk, and there's a lot of information there about me and what I do and what I can do for clients. I'm also on Instagram. There's quite a lot of pictures, as I said earlier, of my baking rather than my work at the moment. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So I hope lots of places to get in touch with me if people would like to.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure I add these resources to the show notes. Julie, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Thank you so much for your time, Amir. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.